In my year-long quest to uncover the American live-action Sailor Moon pilot, I found myself tumbling down a captivating rabbit hole into the mysterious world of Renaissance Atlantic. This elusive company, known for its forgotten anime adaptations, held secrets unknown to the public. Along the way, I encountered a cast of fascinating characters, animators, writers, producers, and executives, all driven by a shared passion to reimagine art. Their stories added depth and excitement to my adventure. Despite many of these projects being cancelled, I witnessed the love and camaraderie poured into each creation, and this investigation has taught me that whether the project may be big or small, every piece of work has its own story. On tonight's episode of Tales of the Lost, my journey reaches its climax. I'm granted a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to sit down with Frank Ward, the enigmatic former CEO of Renaissance Atlantic and Bandai America. Frank holds the crucial keys to this what-if that could have reshaped North America's perception of anime. That same what-if that had been hit by unforeseen circumstances which changed the course of localization history in an instant. On this episode of Tales of the Lost, I delve into intriguing topics such as Starstorm, the rumored Dragonball spin-off, and the newly discovered feud between Frank and the CEO of Funimation. The answers to my burning questions lie within reach, yet my anxiety mounted as I wondered if Frank would grant my request to search through the hidden files stored within the Library of Congress all these years ago. Find out what happens next in this exciting conclusion of the lost anime of Renaissance Atlantic Part 2, The Vindication of Frank Ward.
Hello?
Hi, is this Frank?
It is indeed, yes.
Oh, it's so nice to finally speak with you.
Yeah, I figured out what all this was about. I looked at your interview questions again. Some of this feels like a bad dream. I think you should title the documentary Hubris.
I mean, you guys made a lot of really amazing stuff. I think it's actually very historical for anime in America, so I mean, thank you so much.
Well, when I look back, I just can't remember how in the world we did all that.
Yeah, I mean, it actually precedes a lot of how anime in the 2000s were being adapted into movies. I think in many ways, your team was kind of ahead of the curve with that by already conceiving those ideas some years earlier.
Oh, for sure, yeah. But that's because I failed at toys. I decided the toy market was impossible, so that's really how I got into anime in the first place. Pure greed. Nothing to do with artistic foresight at all. But yes. Anyways, you go. You ask what you want.
All right. Okay.
We'll do the best we can here, and I'll just tell you that I've been rummaging through my stuff since I got in touch with you. I've been rummaging through boxes, and it's been maddening. It's been maddening what I don't have, but it's amazing what I do have.
Would you like to share a bit about yourself and your background before you started working at Bandai and before you created Renaissance Atlantic?
Oh, wow. Yeah, gosh. Yeah, I'll try to make it short. I did quite a lot of things, actually. It's a long and twisted path, really, because I actually started out trying to make a career out of the Army. I spent 6 years on active duty in the American Army. Now, some people think I worked for the Japanese Army, but I didn't. I stumbled into the toy business with Fisher-Price when I was graduating from business school. After the Army, I went to business school and I was looking for a job, and I'd never heard of Fisher-Price toys, but for some reason, they contacted me. So I got involved with them and I got hired, and that was my first job, Fisher-Price Toys. Back then, it was about a $25 million business. That was 1969, a long time ago. But anyway, from there, once you get into an industry and you make some noise, eventually, other people will offer you jobs. And it kind of went like that. I was there, manager at Fisher-Price Europe for 5 or 6 years, and then I was hired by somebody else, and then somebody else, and I finally ended up at Bandai. But I worked, essentially. I spent a lot of time working in Europe in my life for different American companies or different Japanese companies who were all trying to build business in Europe. That's pretty much all I did before I got to Bandai.
Did you find yourself becoming a bit of a toy hobbyist as well, or?
Well, kind of. I mean, in the sense that I had children of my own. Yeah, I was not uninterested in toys. The answer is, I think you have to be slightly childish to do this, and particularly to develop these things. One of the things that I've uncovered here is that we worked on so much. There really was product development, and my first taste with that was when I was director of product development for Fisher-Price Toys in America before I went to Europe. So I got very interested in all the parts of the toy business at that stage.
So we would love to know exactly how you came to form Renaissance Atlantic, and also, how did you find yourself as president of Bandai America?
Well, let's see. I had known the top management of Bandai just by being part of the industry. I knew Makoto Yamashita and several other executives before I ever worked for them. I just knew them, and they hired me because they were having a real struggle in America. In fact, it was worse than a struggle. It was a disaster. And so I was already in California at that stage, and they asked me if I would take over their American operations, which were very small and very confused, and in New Jersey. So that's where we started. In New Jersey was a tiny little turtley business. So we went from there with Bandai, that is. So I was president of Bandai America, and we pulled a few other acquisitions together that they had already made. They were trivial operations. But anyways, I lived in California, so those were my conditions. I said, if you'll move this from New Jersey, I'll do it. So they did, and that's how we got started. And that is when I ran into Bandai. It was an enormous company at the time. They were probably onto something like that as an independent to their huge collection of products in Japan, but none of them ever sold in America. So that was the challenge. How in the world do we take all these Japanese products and convert them into something that Americans might buy? And that was in the 1980s. Anime was just starting. Bandai Japan, I know this is confusing, but Bandai Japan was already in the anime business with Toei. They were a major toy manufacturer, but they also were one of the very early producers of television series. But their deals were always with Toei. Toei spent the money developing their series. Bandai would do the toy line and pay a royalty. So they were used to doing that, and I essentially said, well, why don't we do that in America? And the question then became, who was going to do it at the time? At that time, I'm president of Bandai America. I'm going nowhere trying to peddle their toys, right? Nowhere. So for me, there's a kind of a parachute. I said, let me do this and we'll see how far we get. So I just separated myself from the toy business entirely. Bandai was my sole business. I set up a little office and called it Renaissance Atlantic, and I forget why. It was just a name, that's all. So is this too complicated for you?
Oh no, this is perfect.
So there we were. We had a new company, and now what do? We started simply with with a thing called Little Dracula.
Oh, I heard about that from Marlene, yes.
Yeah. And we had a couple of other false starts at the same time. We were kind of, I don't want to call it right of first refusal, but really, if Bandai was going to bring any more properties to America and we did it, then we would participate in the profits of that kind of enterprise. So it was based on a little bit of investment from Bandai, not a lot, but mostly out of my own pocket. I started Renaissance Atlantic, and I think the first thing we actually got on the air anywhere was Little Dracula. So it really sprang from there, and we had a major business in France. That is to say, Bandai did in France. And France, for some reason, was the only place that they had been successful in Europe. And we then started to work with a French guy who produced one of the early series for us, for all of us from Japan. The French had these restrictions. They still have all kinds of restrictions, but they still had barriers to entry, especially for Japanese companies. So we got the whole Japanese chain out of the picture by signing Renaissance Atlantic Films as a Dutch company. So I would pretend that that was the Dutch company that I was doing all the work in France, and it wasn't the Japanese at all.
Was Little Dracula your first adaptation?
Oh no, I think we probably started with Saint Seiya. I don't remember exactly. And I know this is where it gets complicated. And thinking about this phone call, I'm very conscious of how difficult it is to summarize.
Oh no, don't worry about it.
It's just difficult because what we were really doing was skating between the lines all the time by essentially pretending to be something that we weren't, but being very successful at it, and it was not a criminal activity. So that's how Renaissance Atlantic became, and it became a company that was between the world and France. So as far as the French authorities knew, it was funded by us, but we just weren't physically in France. But we had Bandai, that company, in France, but we were here, and that's how we did it. Eventually, and this is not top secret, I suppose, but at the time, the French were trying to restrict toy imports.
Oh, do you know why that was, or?
Yeah, trade barriers. I mean, they did it with automobiles. The French are famous for doing that. So if you go back to the 80s, I wasn't even working for Bandai then, but I still had the same idea that the company I was working for, I'm sorry for this, but it was Tomy at the time. I was the president of Tomy Europe. So I was still based in Europe, and I had to find out a way to get our toys into France, which Bandai was already in, and I know this was confusing, but I wasn't at Bandai at that point. But they were very successful in France, but they had the same problem with Japanese toys. When I set up Tomy France, they also set up in France and put their company right on the border in Germany. And so we were actually a German company for the first business that we had in France. We had a company, a warehouse managing director, sales, and all that. None of them were employed by a French company, and so the French said, well, you can't do this. We said, we're already doing this. They couldn't find a loophole. They couldn't stop it. So anyway, that's a wandering way of answering the question, which I didn't really answer. How did I get to be Renaissance Atlantic? It's kind of out of thin air. I invented it.
Do you have any memorable stories at either company that have stayed with you?
Oh my god. See, that's the problem. It keeps me up at night. You had me thinking about things that I had forgot already. There's so many things. It just was a remarkable period in my life for all sorts of reasons. But I went from Fisher-Price to essentially skipping a step. It's not particularly relevant, but it's that I did briefly stop at Tonka, but then Tonka went bust. So I didn't have any option there, which is kind of memorable actually. I had moved to Minnesota to be head of international for Tonka, and then they collapsed. So I was marooned there in Minnesota, and so that's how I bounced back to Bandai. At the time, Tonka was already trying to sell their toys to Japan to Bandai, and since I already knew the Bandai people, I went to Tonka, and they were happy to run the Japanese business for a while. So there's a long window, and these are all stories that are stories behind stories.
Yes, it's all very layered as well.
Yeah, so you'll understand a little bit why it's hard to answer the question of how did I start and what do I remember? So many exciting things were happening all at the same time. Meanwhile, I'm bouncing and forth thousands of miles with my wife and dogs and horses and kids and I don't know what all. So it was quite an odyssey.
Do you remember any of your employees like Rocky Solotov, Marlene Sharp, Ellen Aronson Prince, or Salvador Litvak?
Litvak, I do not know.
Apparently he was a video editor. I think he helped Marlene to edit the demo reel or show the reel of your different shows and...
Oh, I see. Yeah, I wouldn't know that. Well, Marlene, I love. She is a stalwart. I think we were all done there in the first year or two. We were just a little office there in Beverly Hills, and Beverly Hills was showing off, you know? I didn't have any income. These were all risks that one takes. So I signed a lease on this office because if you're going to be somebody, you have to have an office. Good to have one on Beverly Drive and Beverly Hills, so that's what I did. Me and Marlene.
Yes, she did mention that, yeah.
That's about it. She probably hates me by now, but I don't know. We started to hire a few other people. One of the first people we hired was Ellen, and there were a few other people sprinkled in there. But Ellen was also a stalwart, and I didn't realize. She sounds like she got married, but to me, she's Aronson. I did see the Prince part, yeah, so we were together through some interesting times, to say the least. I don't think we ever had more than 4 people that I actually paid. What we would do is just pick a project or 2 projects or 3 projects and try and figure out what was needed for them and hire somebody that could help us. Whether it was a pilot or a script or what have you, which is how you ended up with these posters, because one of the best ways I always thought to start any kind of pitch was just to show them something.
Yeah.
And I couldn't show pilots all the time, I just couldn't afford it. A lot of money on pilots, I'll tell you that. See, I look at those pilots and I just see lost money.
I guess with all these imports coming from Toei and Bandai Japan, have you been a fan of Japanese animation prior to the partnership that you had?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was familiar with Japan from when I started to work with Tonka, and Bandai was the distributor in Japan. So I spent a fair amount of time in Japan at 86, 87, somewhere in there. I got to know Japan through these relations and the Bandai people. And when I saw what Bandai was doing, it planted the seed in my brain of, why isn't anybody in America doing that? To then, why aren't you linking up your toy line with some kind of vehicle? And Bandai and Toei already had an enormous library. So when I got over to working for Bandai, that was it. I said to Yamashina, that's what we ought to be doing. Forget about trying to schleep these toys of yours. Because, I mean, let's face it, they weren't great. The Japanese quality for toys were not good for babies. They couldn't pass the tests in America, all the swallow tests and all that.
Yeah, there's a lot of small parts.
My idea was, how do you sell the toy line? And one that's already been invented in America when you have no support. You just couldn't afford to advertise. That was a fool's game. So that was it. Let's try animation. Let's try and see if we can import some of your animation now. Meanwhile, Saban, who I kind of knew anyway, because Saban used to hang around the toys fairs and I used to hang around toy fairs, but I was a nobody. He was already kind of somebody, but I was really nobody. So we always got along, and he started down the same road himself, and he became very familiar with it, and he knew Bandai people. He knew Toei people. So we had 2 guys who had nothing else in common other than they knew each other. And that's when we got together, really. He used to pitch me stuff all the time. When I'm saying me, I'm saying when I was actually trying to run a toy business.
Ah, I see.
When I was president of Bandai America, and when I started out with Renaissance, of course, and one of the things he showed me at the MIPP down in Cannes, one day he showed me a pilot. It was a small pilot that he had put together for Power Rangers. Now bear in mind, they had a long list of ancestors for Power Rangers by different names, so that gets confusing too. You asked me something about Bioman.
Yes.
It's possible, but it could have been a predecessor of Bandai Japan. They were already in that business. Power Rangers had already been, 5 years in existence. And in Japan, awkwardly enough, it was Zoo Ranger. So you don't want that title in America. Yada just dodged that one. So Saban shows me this 4-minute pilot that he put together right there in California with kids, humans. And then he cuts in the Japanese stuff from Toei, which he borrowed or cut or however he got it. And right there on that very moment was when Power Rangers was, what can I say, born, I suppose. And I said to him and my Japanese friends, we've gotta do this. But of course, neither one of us had money. We had some money. I didn't have any money. So we put together that whole thing for developing. He and I made a contract because we wanted to make this Renaissance Atlantic, so it was not part of Bandai or anything else. It wasn't a Japanese company. We just got around all that by making all the contracts between Saban and Renaissance Atlantic. So
yeah, that's really interesting. The picture I sent, actually, did that look familiar at all for the early Power Rangers concept?
It looks very familiar as kind of a typical Japanese production. I don't remember. There were no toys involved, and the Japanese had a toy line, but it wasn't what we were thinking about. We were thinking about doing live action and just cutting in their film, not even worrying about the toy designs. We wanted to design the toys so it looked just like in the film, which is what we did. We did it all backwards, essentially. And so, I'm sure, can remember a lot about this, but because he's a big marketing mark now.
It really blew up into something else. It's kind of crazy how long it's lasted.
Yeah, we were doing what I would describe as he's in some kind of a house and somewhere in the backwoods of Hollywood, and you've got a secretary, and he had Shuki Levi, and he was doing cartoons, and he was doing music for cartoons.
Oh, right, Shuki Levy. Didn't he do the intro for the Dragon Ball Z dub?
Yeah, probably did, which we never got off the ground because, again, we ran into product rights versus TV rights. This happened to us over and over and over again because of the model they used in Japan. Bandai always ended up with the toys and the rights to these designs, and Toei or somebody, doesn't matter who, somebody else had the film rights. So we were always involved in this crazy business. And Saban could tie up Toei, but he couldn't tie up Bandai. I could tie up Bandai, but I couldn't tie up Toei. So we were allies of need. And we had fun too, I'd have to say.
Do you have any memories of the Dragon Ball concept? Because I remember when I spoke to Marlene, she actually said that while she wasn't there for Dragon Ball, she did remember hearing you talk about it here and there around the office.
Well, yeah, we were trying to do the same thing with Dragon Ball. We ran into exactly the same problem. In this case, we ran into the Gen Fukuyama or Fukanaki. I'll send you to whatever he calls his company. Funimation?
Yes, Funimation.
Right, well that's where we hit the wall on Dragon Ball because he pops up out of nowhere and he's got the rights to Dragon Ball for America. He doesn't have any toys, but he's got the rights to distribute the anime. So we just dumped it right there. It resulted in us scrapping the project and reusing the concept for another martial arts show. I mean, I had a few meetings with him. They were not pleasant, certainly, because he had no idea what he was doing and he didn't understand that his film rights were worthless without a toy line, and nobody was going to do the toy line unless he was committed to a film deal of some kind. And so I don't know what he finally did. It doesn't matter what he finally did, but when you mention Dragon Ball, I see him as one of the obstacles to that. Well, we had a few like that you just abandoned because you had to have the cooperation of so many people. I've told you a lot of things about Saban that nobody knows or remembers because they didn't know at the time. Dragon Ball belonged to I forgot the name, I can't remember. The name was something that Fuganaga had a connection with, whether it was a relative or an uncle or something. For some reason, he had the in with people that owned the rights to Dragon Ball, as I remember. This is, I think, probably close to what happened, but anyway, I found out that he's still in the investment business somewhere, Fukunaga. You could probably talk to him if you haven't, whatever his name.
Oh yeah, if I can find him for sure.
Well, he works with an investment company in Texas. That's how I tracked him down when you alerted me. I thought, where the hell did he go? And he is somehow involved with an investment company which has nothing to do with cartoons. But he lists in his own resume every anime that ever existed in Japan as being the American distributor, which was not true. You got his name right. You see, he works for some company in Texas. I don't even know if it's a company's investment company, and he's got the interview on the online with somebody about his animation, and I think he called the company Funimation.
Yes, Funimation.
So that rings a bell for you. Anyway, he claims to have been the American to introduce anime. He didn't introduce anime to America for sure. That was already an in product since the late 80s. Although when you first went out and tried to sell a TV network on an anime show, they'd laugh at you, literally.
Oh. I guess they just didn't understand the concept of it, I guess?
Literally, no, absolutely. They thought it was a joke. Nobody remembers, unless you were a relatively old person, that there's a lot of contempt for the Japanese right into the 80s.
Yeah, and that's so crazy because now it's like the medium itself is so influential in our culture.
But it happened. It was very much a cult thing in the 80s. And so I have been gently asked to leave several major studios when I tried to sell them this kind of thing. Not my own pilot, but just the idea of anime. You'd say, hey, what do you think about this? And you'd show them an episode of, I don't know, Sailor Moon, and they'd go, I don't know. If you showed the Sailor Moon Japanese products to a Toys R Us buyer, they'd say that was a joke. They didn't want any part of it. That was the main obstacle. That's the story of where that business has gone.
I see. That's really unfortunate.
So you're onto something that's a relatively recent phenomena, and now it's an institution.
I understand that Renaissance Atlantic also went on to produce WMAC Masters, which was the martial arts show.
Oh, yes, I did that too, yes. I made that mess all by myself.
Oh, really? That was a great show.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. It cost me a lot of money to go nowhere.
Well, no, there's actually quite a bit of people online who still have a lot of fond memories with it, and I get a lot of emails asking about, oh, can you ask him about WMAC Masters, or do you know anything else about the show?
We shot that in Florida, and the idea was to take advantage of the wave of interest in wrestling and martial arts, and how can I do a show like this that sells products? This was during the messy Dragonball debacle, and we needed something new. This was thinking, boys are going to like the show, but I can't do anything with it. I've got to make something with a storyline that a series would sustain because I can't get any shelf space unless they have a series, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I ended up I can't remember his name. I'm blanking on his name. But anyways, the guy on our team, Al Khan. Al Khan was my man. Al Khan was a big deal in the toy/film business, and I don't know if he's still alive, but I went to Al Khan and I said, how about this for an idea? And he said, great idea, let's do it. He put up a ton of money and he arranged for the production, and I arranged for writing the storylines, and I arranged to have the products designed. I mean, just for the characters. So that when we went out to sell it, we'd have some three-dimensional characters and say, this is the storyline, here's what it looks like, and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of interest in that, but it was hard to expand beyond the characters. Like, what kind of toys could you make? And had it caught on a bit sooner or a bit later, it would have been a wonderful Nintendo license.
I actually agree with that, yeah. I think especially with the games.
Nintendo was not Nintendo back then. They had already failed once in America around that time.
That's actually amazing, because I remember that show had, I think it was Bruce Lee's daughter?
Maybe. Could be.
I think it was Shannon Lee, yeah.
I was there for a lot of early shooting too, because it was in Orlando and it was winter time wherever I lived at the time. So I liked going to Orlando at that point. Anyways, WMAC, martial arts, yes, that's my name. That's my everything, my inspiration. But I never had enough money to make stuff work without having a lot of partners, which is fine. It was all right.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely would have been much harder back then, especially with everything being so new. So I think just the effort that was put in is greatly appreciated by so many people today.
Well, it's nice to learn that. It was a good show. It was a decent show. It was a kind of funny show. It wasn't really a violent show, and it had a lot of sorts, as I recall. But there again, the only way we were going to get on television was to offer something.
Yeah.
And so that's where the need for a toy company comes in. Somebody's gotta fund this stuff because the networks are not gonna run it. And you fund it with, well, you know how syndication works. Somebody's gotta step up with some advertising money.
Yeah, they need to make sure it will have longevity and that they can make money off of the product.
Yeah, and I can't remember his name, Shelley something or other. Al was in that business. He knew the syndication business really well. So he was able to help us syndicate it rather quickly. We have quite a few stations that agreed to carry it, but only in return for somebody's advertising budget. That was where I tapped Bandai.
I see.
If you see how that works, you have to sell them, and you have to sell to networks, and you have to have partners, and somebody has to produce the product, and everyone wants to get paid at the end of all that. So it's a long road to get something like WMAC on the air. And this is all happening in a very short time frame.
Yeah, just to make sure everybody else is on board, just to get the project basically running.
It's kind of interesting to me, but when you sort of piqued my memory a little bit, I'm now kind of amazed too. I mean, did I do that? How do we do that? I don't even remember the name, and I loved Starstorm. That was going to be so good.
I managed to figure out 3 out of 5 of the actors who were on set for that. I feel like it could have actually been something really amazing if it had come out, because around that time, so many people were into martial arts and other fighting shows.
Yeah, exactly. I was already working this when I was in the same business with martial arts and I was on the same road. How do I exploit this when I don't really have a toy line? And now I'm thinking Bandai has all these toys, and if we can just make a show, we'll make the product and we'll be off and running. But we never got past that pilot. We couldn't put it together. We couldn't put the pieces all together to get it done. I like the concept. I also like the pilot we did.
Would you happen to remember any elements of that pilot episode? Because so many people have been searching for that video. And I mean the trailer, it just really leads you to have so many questions as to what actually happened.
Well, I've been rummaging through boxes. I haven't seen it. I know it exists. That's why I think it was done in Canada. Well, I don't remember though. I was doing it. I don't remember where I did it. For a while we were producing these pilots in Vancouver because the Canadian government put some money into it. I'll tell you what, I'll have a look. I just don't know why it doesn't exist somewhere. Somebody, I don't know who did the film. Who did the film? Who claims to produce it?
I think Ellen told me, I don't know if I have my notes here, but I think she mentioned someone like one of the directors or someone who was involved in the project, but I'd have to double check. But I think that it actually might be registered in the Library of Congress, but they just might have misplaced it. I mean, I know they have the trailer, so you can actually watch the trailer for it, but they don't have a register for the actual pilot. And some people called in and they were told, oh, I think we did have it, but we might have misplaced it. Apparently they lose stuff in there from time to time, so...
Well, yeah, I guess that's understandable. So this is a mystery that, it annoys me. You get busy, you don't think about it, and imagine that there's any future to this thing, but Ellen, I think she was pretty much involved in everything that I did.
Oh yeah, she was really excited to talk about Gundam, actually. She said that she had a lot of fun working on the project, but I actually wasn't sure how far in development that got. Was it more or less just conversations about it, or was there an actual pilot episode?
Yeah, no, it was just what I had said. We couldn't get a hold of the video rights.
Ah, okay.
We couldn't make any television out of it, really. Thanks to Gun Fuka Naka, who thought he had the world by the tail, but he didn't. He didn't understand that you need some partners to get this thing done. I confused the issue, but never mind if Ellen doesn't remember it, and I have no idea because she would be my go-to. Not that I'm not even sure where she is, but anyways, I wish her well if you're talking with her. She was a good partner, even though I'm not terribly easy to work with. Now, I see on here Nutty Nights. I really don't know what Nutty Nights was. I see a picture of it. I see these little characters. I suspect that's something we just invented.
When the picture was sent to me, it was kind of hard to decipher what was going on, but once I finally got a full, clear image of what was happening, I feel like I would have watched Nutty Nights, and I probably would have watched Jungle Lords as well.
Yeah, Jungle Wars was going to be that was a combination of not just wanting to be a boys action line. We wanted to have a boys action line that nobody had any TV rights to because it didn't exist. And I made this poster, which I wish that I kept. Evidently, I didn't keep it. It was a nice poster, actually, with these preposterous creatures that came from another planet and landed in the jungle and all that. So it was kind of an interesting storyline, but the idea that the characters were all tattooed, you see, was what I thought was intriguing at the time, because then people didn't use too many tattoos at that point. So when I saw that on your list, I was thinking, oh my god, I forgot about this. That was another one. You couldn't get people interested in this one.
Oh, I mean, I feel like I totally would, because it looks like Skeleton Warriors meets like Mummies Alive. Something about that animation style.
Oh yeah, it was going to be great because they were going to show you how we look to people like them. That was the whole idea. It was going to be funny, kind of. It was meant to be humorous at the same time. It was meant to be something for little boys. I don't have anything against little girls, by the way.
Oh yeah, don't worry.
I've got 5 of them, so...
It was just a product of the time because they always seem to associate more action-oriented stuff with boys, so...
Which is why we were going against the grain with Sailor Moon.
Yeah, Sailor Moon was definitely special. It was very unique when it came to Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, that was... I didn't finish that. All those things. There's so many angles for those stories. Sailor Moon almost made it to Fox. You may remember Fox went through a couple of upheavals and they finally turned their whole cartoon business over to Saban, but before that, Saban almost had a deal with Fox to do Sailor Moon as we had conceived it. Fox, right at that point, it was a year into, Fox up and hired a new president of the kids network, Fox Kids. Margaret Lesh had been running that, and they hired a new person to replace her, and that person said, "We're going to be a boys network now." And with that, he cut his own throat.
Oh.
Literally.
Wait, what?
So Sailor Moon was, whatever we called it at the time, it was ready. It was like right there. You could touch it almost.
Wow.
And he decided, no, we're not going to do it. Okay, whatever his name was. And he was fired within 18 months.
Oh my gosh, so he just came in and was like, "This is a boys club."
That's what he said.
Wow.
He sure figured it all out, right? All right, nice call. I don't even want to remember his name, but if you stumble across the history of the Fox Kids network, you'll see that it went from being Fox with a new president and bounced over, and Saban picked up all the rest of it.
Very interesting.
Which is really what made him big with exposure. He went from being a schlepperd to the boss.
Actually, when looking through the catalog of shows that had been in talks to be created, there was Starstorm, which was the live-action Saint Seiya adaptation, but there was also a fully American animated concept called Guardians of the Cosmos, which just blew my mind. Like, I didn't realize that there had been a second attempt to do Saint Seiya as an American cartoon style.
Guardians of the Cosmos?
Yeah, I sent it. It's number 9. There's a YouTube link there, but there was a full pilot episode and everything, and it was produced by Renaissance Atlantic and Fred Wolf Films.
Yes, Fred Wolf Films.
Yeah, the people who did Ninja Turtles.
Oh yes, I know. I did a lot of things with Fred at one time or another, but I'm blanking on what in the world Guardians of the Cosmos is.
Yeah, it was apparently, I think it was in 1989, so it was like maybe 4 years before Starstorm, but it was registered under the Library of Congress.
It's not emerged from my box of things, although the name sounds very familiar. Yeah, I just need 1 or 2 more hints. Do you have any visuals?
Yeah, there should be a YouTube link in number 9 and one of the questions I sent.
Ah, gosh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's okay. I'll see here. Oh, I see you. How about that? There I am, 1993.
It's a very catchy theme song, by the way.
Oh my gosh, that animation is Japanese. The animation is certainly Japanese, what I'm looking at. So it's a Japanese series that in Japan probably has a different name, and I probably went to Fred and said, "Fred, what do you think we can do with this?" And Fred was just on the cusp with turtles. He was up with eyeballs and all of that sort of thing, so it's right around that. Whatever he produced was a pilot, I think.
Yeah, I haven't posted the episode yet, but it's a full 25-minute pilot episode of Guardians of the Cosmos, but it's basically Saint Seiya, but just like an American animated version.
Okay, I see almost certainly Guardians of something or other came from whatever they call it, came from Tokyo. If you got Fred Wolf having produced something, he did it on our request. We probably paid for it. Was this a series or just an episode?
It was 1 episode, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we ever sold it. I don't think so. We renamed something that came from Japan where Bandai had the toys and somebody who knows had the TV, and we probably called it Guardians of the whatever we did. We were probably just trying to dodge somebody else's name.
Yeah, well, it was called Saint Seiya before, but Saint Seiya was what became Starstorm. And then this is also Guardians of the Cosmos. So there was like the live action one, and there was the animated pilot here.
Oh dear, what you just said is not how I remember it, but it's been so long. At that time, boy, we're just fishing. A bunch of not so well-funded people trying to somehow or another, get something done in 93. I don't remember. I don't connect Saint Seiya with anything except
Starstorm. Guardians of the Cosmos for sure we worked on, and you're saying Fred Wolf produced what I just looked at? I don't know what we did. It's conceivable somebody else might remember. Somebody else in all this network might remember better than I do. They don't go together in my mind, in other words, what I just looked at from Guardians with Fred Wolf.
Did Renaissance Atlantic ever work with the animation studio Sunrise?
The Japanese company?
Yeah.
Yeah, they probably own the rights to some of the things. I can't remember if that was Toei or if it was someone else.
There was another pilot that they had produced for Gundam, except it was called Doozy Bots, and some people had thought it possibly had connections to Renaissance Atlantic. Do you remember working on Doozy Bots?
Yeah, I don't remember that at all. Oh, Sunrise strikes me as something that Bandai was trying to do under a different name.
Yeah.
From Japan, we had a fair number of cross currents going on at that time because Bandai Japan was a big company. So they had divisions that were working on things that nobody knew about necessarily outside of Japan. So we sometimes bumped into other Bandai people undercover, like the CIA.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap I'm noticing.
Oh, yes. Oh, well. Anyway, I hope this is of some help to you. I wish I could be more of help only for my own satisfaction. I would like to resolve these things.
Oh, I was actually curious. So it's possible that Starstorm might exist, like the full episode inside of the Library of Congress, along with other material that we've talked about today. Is it possible at all to get your permission to take those out of the Library of Congress?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I will. I'll send you a contract, I guess, to look over everything, just so you know what's being taken out beforehand, but thank you so much. Like, you don't know how helpful this is.
Well, you ought to get some reward after all this.
Thank you.
Surely, I'm not going to take this to my grave for sure. I'll leave it to somebody.
I've been like 100% dedicated to this entire Renaissance Atlantic project for so long, so I greatly appreciate that.
That's almost as much as I did. Anyway, well listen, this has been fun.
Thank you. I mean, it's a major honor to get to speak with you. Honestly, I'm a huge animation buff, whether it be English animation or Japanese. And yeah, I think that your efforts are pretty much historical. And I know I've said it a million times, but thank you so much.
Well, that's very kind of you. I appreciate it. If you knew me better, you know that none of that was true. But as I said, it's strange, not to beat my chest. It's amazing what we got done during that period of time with nothing. Where did I get that energy? Lots of desperation is probably what it was.
No, you should be proud.
The wolves were nipping at my heels. Well, you know, I never wanted to work for big companies, so I did this on purpose. If I was going to fail, I was gonna try to do as best as I could. You know, do it myself. I was able to do that, and for that, I'll always be grateful. Thank you very much for contacting me. Yes, send me whatever you need signed. I'd be happy. I'm anxious to see some of that stuff too, if we can. We are working on an entirely different project. A colleague of mine have been working on a Civil War project, nothing to do with toys. We just got into the Library of Congress. We're pretty thrilled with that. Our little podcast, or whatever we call it, about the Civil War, bringing us Civil War for 10 years now. I'm very proud.
That's amazing. Do you have anywhere that I could check that out? Because I would totally put that in the documentary as well.
I can send you a link to that site. It's actually a brand new website, and I use it myself, so let me tell you a link to that later today.
Okay, sounds good.
It's called the Thomas Jackson Letters. Thomas Jackson was a relative of my colleague who, right at the beginning of the Civil War, lived in America. He was a British immigrant, and he wrote extensively letters to the editor all about promoting the American cause and trying to get the British involved. That's what Thomas Jackson's all about. So if you're interested at all in the Civil War, I'll try to send you the link.
Thank you. I'll make sure to check it out.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, good talking to you.
Thank you. You too, Frank.
On TJ here, John Pauling, a Brit living here, and I started with a pile of wrinkled letters and a cookie tin his mother left him, entirely untouched. A long first step was reading the impossible script for transcripting, then placing each in some historical context. In a kingdom of the blind and all that, yours truly was able to provide roughly what was happening as TJ wrote. My friend did all the heavy lifting and has managed to develop a formidable partnership with the Library of Congress. Awesome some win after 10 years. He is pictured left. The other is not me, in case you wondered. Back to Pretty Soldier Sailor Moon, as the Japanese call it. I am now obsessed with prodding my brain on that Star Storm project and Fred's role, which never had anything to do with Sailor.
As a major chapter in my investigation closed, I gained valuable insights into the creation of Renaissance Atlantic, a crucial player during a challenging era for importing Japanese anime to the United States. While finding success in Europe, anime from the 80s and earlier struggled to resonate with American audiences, leading to its perception of being an unviable toy medium unless tied to toy sales. I had also learned that a handful of pilots had been shot in Canada. More specifically, Frank had recalled vague memories of Starstorm being shot in Vancouver. Surprisingly, he had forgotten not only about Guardians of the Cosmos, but also that Fred Wolf Films had handled the animation. The demise of Saban Moon was partly attributed to Margaret Loesch's departure from the Fox network, as her replacement soon declared the company to be a boys' network, sealing its fate. Although some celebrate the non-existence of Saban Moon, it's important to note that the live-action pilot we saw was merely a proof of concept. With proper funding, it would have been a vast improvement on what had been crafted on such a small budget, and knowing that possibility could have almost materialized is in itself quite fascinating to me. Our conversation also shed light on Frank's resentment over losing the distribution rights to Gen Fukunaga, CEO of Funimation. Further exploration revealed that Fukunaga's connection to toy animation through his uncle allowed for him to secure the Dragonball license, creating a very complicated loophole. Fukunaga convinced his colleague, Daniel Kokenager, to sell his family business, which propelled Funimation's growth and paved the way for more anime acquisitions after 1994. Frank seemed unaware of the growth of Funimation since its inception, and that they had gone on to owning the license for a majority of anime dubs since its creation, which is not at all surprising given his many years of being away from the business since retiring. While a lot of fans are grateful for the efforts of Funimation, I feel this entire deep dive allowed me to see that the image of Frank in Renaissance Atlantic over time had become vastly misunderstood. Frank's intentions were not driven by corporate greed or a desire to dilute the Asian art form, but rather it was a response to the demands of network executives and the initial lukewarm reception of anime in North America. In essence, his efforts were aimed at preserving the franchise, not harming it. What I initially thought would turn out to be a cautionary tale of greed between American executives turned out to be a battle between two men to save beloved anime franchises that were sadly at the mercy of corporate greed mixed with xenophobia from out-of-touch network figureheads, incapable of being won over by a culture they likely viewed as inferior. Unfortunately, Gen Fukunaga and Frank Ward had been caught in the middle of all this chaos, creating a misunderstanding between the two. Mixed in with a little bit of ego and pride, it's understandable why these two clashed, but ultimately, through their acts, they wanted the exact same thing for anime in America, to exist unapologetically. Gen Fukunaga and Frank Ward ultimately wanted to see anime succeed in the United States, but just went about it differently and wound up clashing as a result, when perhaps they could have worked together if things were different. Frank, realizing that executives rejected anime on the spot from racism, offered to transform the medium into something the US market would be more likely to take a chance on. And Gen, with his connections to toy animation and the right financial backing, was able to import anime without having to go through the difficult hoops of American executives that would have otherwise passed on the idea. Though Gen's efforts proved to be successful in the end, the trials and tribulations for both men wouldn't have been as arduous if not for the attitudes of Fox executives that would quite literally laugh at the idea of Japanese Japanese animation. Frank Ward's solution to sour the attitudes of discriminatory executives was an attempt at salvaging the anime medium. Maybe if not for Frank's efforts and the intervention of Gen, our early perceptions of anime and its North American influence would have been vastly different from how we know it today. Surely the medium would have eventually found a home here in North America, but the magnitude of which the West was rocked by animania from shows like Sailor Moon, Digimon, and Pokemon could have had such less of a cultural impact than what millennials of the 90s have come to look back on with such a fondness. It's hard to imagine their potency being any less, as their influence can be seen in various facets of our culture today, from American cinema to music to television and, more importantly, visual art. Despite the initial hiccups and flaws of early English dubs, this sequence of events couldn't have unfolded more favorably. Considering all the factors at play, it seems like we ended up in the best possible timeline. But these past efforts shouldn't go overlooked. Some of these adaptations serve as benchmarks and influential references for later dubbed materials, making them intriguing artifacts in the history of anime localization. Rocky Solotov, Marlene Sharp, Dale Hendrickson, Lynn Walsh, Stephen Wiltzbach, Frank Ward, Chuck Jones, Fred Wolf Films, Raymond, Salvador Lidvack, Ron Wasserman, Haim Saban, Shuki Levy, everyone involved should take pride in what they built, regardless of the outcome. This journey into the realm of what if was truly captivating, and thankfully, Frank bestowed upon me the greatest gift of all, the literal keys to the city. He had given me the honor of showcasing whatever was remaining of these artifacts from inside the Library of Congress in all its glory, and as a result, I'd like to introduce you all to the Vault. Have you ever wanted to know exactly what sort of lost secrets are hidden inside the Library of Congress? Welcome to The Vault, a series focused on all lost media submitted to the Congress Library. More specifically, our journey starts inside the vaults of Renaissance Atlantic, a company responsible for a slew of Americanized anime adaptations that never quite saw the light of day. In this series, secrets from their collection will be unearthed. Prepare yourselves for back-to-back episodes showcasing all the lost anime concepts made by Renaissance Atlantic, and feast your eyes on a menu of TV treatments, show bibles, concept art, and a little bit of visual media for dessert. This is The Vault.
Truth was that